January 15, 1919. Boston's North End awakens to something strange: warm weather. After days of bitter cold, temperatures climb above 40 degrees Fahrenheit. It's unseasonably mild for a Boston winter. Workers shed their heavy coats. Children play outside. Horses clop along Commercial Street, pulling wagons of freight. At Engine 31 Firehouse, firefighters sit down for lunch and a friendly card game. Nearby, 3 children: 8-year-old Antonio D'Estacio, his 10-year-old sister Maria, and their friend Pasquale Jantosca, also 10, gather firewood near a massive steel tank. At 529 Commercial Street stands a monstrosity, a 50-foot-tall, 90-foot-wide tank containing 2.3 million gallons of sticky, fermenting molasses. Nobody realizes they're about to witness one of America's strangest disasters. The tank that nobody wanted. The molasses tank appeared in 1915, built by the Purity Distilling Company, a subsidiary of United States Industrial Alcohol. World War I created massive demand for industrial alcohol, used in munitions manufacturing. Molasses, shipped from the Caribbean, was distilled into alcohol. The company needed storage, massive storage. They built the tank in just weeks. No architect, no structural engineer. The company treasurer, Arthur Gell, oversaw construction despite having 0 engineering experience. They tested it with just 6 inches of water, nowhere near enough to check for structural integrity. When filled with molasses, the tank leaked so badly from its seams that children collected buckets of the sticky liquid. Locals complained constantly. The company's solution? They painted the tank brown to hide the leaking molasses. The groaning noises each time it was filled, ignored. The thin steel walls, half as thick as they should have been. Nobody checked. The tank was a disaster waiting to happen. Signs nobody heeded. The steel used in the tank's construction contained too little manganese, making it dangerously brittle in cold temperatures. Boston winters regularly dropped below freezing. The tank's walls were less than an inch thick, far too thin for the weight they needed to support. When filled to capacity, the tank held 26 million pounds of molasses. Local residents reported the structural problems. The tank groaned. It leaked constantly. Sometimes rivets would pop off and shoot through the air like bullets. The elevated railway ran right beside it. The firehouse sat nearby. Residential buildings surrounded it on all sides. But this was 1915 to 1919, an era of rapid industrialization with virtually no safety oversight. Companies built what they wanted, where they wanted. The North End was home to poor Italian immigrants. Nobody listened to their complaints. The tank had been filled to capacity only 8 times since construction. Each time stressed the walls. Each time brought it closer to catastrophic failure. The day everything changed. January 14th, 1919. A ship delivers fresh molasses to the tank. The molasses is warmed to decrease viscosity for easier transfer. The already stressed tank now holds warm molasses on top of older, colder molasses. The temperature differential creates pressure. Thermal expansion pushes against those dangerously thin walls. January 15th dawns unseasonably warm. As temperatures rise above 40 degrees, the molasses inside expands further. The steel walls, brittle from cold, now face unprecedented stress. At the Engine 31 Firehouse, George Leahy, a 38-year-old firefighter, has just finished his shift. He heads upstairs to sleep. On Commercial Street, workers load freight cars. Horses pull wagons. The 3 children, Antonio, Maria, and Pasquale, laugh as they gather wood. Barman Martin Clufferty dozes at his family's home overlooking the tank. It's 12:30 in the afternoon. Life is ordinary for 90 more seconds. 12:30 p.m. The tank explodes. A low rumble. Some thought it was an approaching elevated train. Others heard a roar like thunder. Firefighters at Engine 31 heard a staccato sound, like machine gun fire. It was rivets shooting out of the tank, each one a steel bullet. Then, the tank burst. A tremendous crash, a deep growl. The 50-foot steel tank ripped apart, unleashing 2.3 million gallons of crude molasses in an instant. The force hurled a 1-ton piece of steel into the elevated railway, buckling the tracks. The explosion sent a blast of air that knocked people off their feet, blocks away. A 40-foot wave of molasses buckled the elevated railroad tracks, crushed buildings, and inundated the neighborhood. The brown tsunami rushed through Commercial Street at 35 miles per hour, faster than anyone could run, 15 to 40 feet high, 160 feet wide, a wall of sticky death. The wave devours everything. The Boston Globe wrote that the force of the molasses wave caused buildings to cringe up as though they were made of pasteboard. The Engine 31 firehouse was knocked completely off its foundation. The second story pancaked down onto the first floor. Inside, firefighters, including George Leahy, were trapped. Firefighter Bill Connor later testified, "I looked out the window and saw a wall of molasses rolling like a wave at the seashore. The next thing I knew, I came to under the building." The collapsed floors created an 18-inch crawl space. Molasses flooded in, rising to their ears. They kept their noses and mouths above the fluid, bumping their heads on the floor above. The 3 children gathering firewood never had a chance. Antonio Di Stasio, Maria Di Stasio, and Pasquale Iantosca were all instantly swallowed by the torrent. Antonio was flung into a light post, suffering severe head injuries. Maria suffocated in the molasses. Pasquale was struck and killed by a railroad car swept up in the wave. Martin Clufferty's house was torn from its foundation and smashed against the elevated train platform. He woke up floating in several feet of molasses, watching his home crumble. He used his floating bed frame as a makeshift boat, the story, to rescue his sister Teresa. His mother and younger brother drowned. Rescue in a sea of syrup. Within minutes, police, firefighters, and over 100 sailors from the USS Nantucket arrived. They found a half-mile swath of destruction. Waist-deep molasses everywhere. Bodies, human and horse, struggling in the sticky mass. Here and there struggled a form. Whether it was animal or human being was impossible to tell, a Boston Post reporter wrote. The cold air made the molasses harden quickly, creating a quicksand-like trap. Rescuers became stuck themselves and needed rescue. Engine 7's Captain Crake spotted yellow hair floating in the molasses. He plunged his arms into the gooey liquid and recovered the body of Maria Di Stasio. At the collapsed firehouse, over 50 men dug frantically to free trapped firefighters. They used acetylene torches to cut through wreckage. A billiard table had trapped George Leahy. After 2 hours, they reached him. Exhausted, he dropped into the molasses and drowned. His colleagues Nat Bowering and Bill Connor survived despite the molasses flooding repeatedly to their ears. The grim toll. 21 people died, 150 were injured. The deceased included Pasquale Iantosca and Maria Di Stasio, 2 10-year-olds who had been out enjoying the unseasonably warm day, and George Leahy, an Engine 31 fireman. Most victims were laborers and drivers, poor Italian immigrants working at the North End paving yard. Many drowned, suffocated by molasses filling their noses, mouths, and lungs. Others were crushed by debris. Some died instantly. Others lingered for days with infections and trauma before succumbing. Dozens of horses died too, stuck in the molasses like flies on flypaper, unable to escape. Pasquale's father had watched from their apartment window as his son disappeared into the brown wave. He searched for hours. When he finally trudged home alone, exhausted and disconsolate, his wife, Maria, was waiting. He didn't need to speak. Coming home alone said everything. Cleanup, a 6-month nightmare. The molasses coated everything. Streets, buildings, wreckage, people. Molasses coated the wreckage, making it almost impossible to move fragments of building and vehicles. Workers tried using fire hoses. The water just spread the molasses around. Then someone discovered salt water broke down molasses. City workers began spraying the area with water pumped in from the harbor. The Boston fireboat, whose firehouse had been destroyed in the flood, pumped seawater onto the streets for months. Everything touched by molasses needed cleaning. Phone booths, movie theaters, automobiles, sidewalks. The smell lingered for a week. The cleanup took 6 months. And according to local legend, on hot summer days for decades afterward, you could still smell molasses in Boston's North End. The company blames anarchists. United States Industrial Alcohol immediately denied responsibility. They claimed anarchists had bombed the tank. It was 1919, the height of the first Red Scare. Anti-Italian sentiment ran high. 90% of North End residents were Italian immigrants. The company exploited those prejudices. Within hours, their lawyers were pushing the anarchist bomb theory. Some believed it. After all, hadn't anarchists been active in Boston? Couldn't this be sabotage? But witnesses had heard the groaning. They'd seen the leaking. They'd warned the company repeatedly. This wasn't terrorism. This was negligence. 6 years of legal warfare. Over 125 lawsuits were filed against United States Industrial Alcohol. The litigation involved 3,000 witnesses and nearly 45,000 pages of testimony. So many lawyers showed up that the courtroom couldn't hold them all. The company spent over $50,000 on expert witnesses, claiming the collapse resulted from sabotage or fermentation explosion. Anything but structural failure. In 2016, a team of scientists and students at Harvard University conducted extensive studies, concluding that the reports of the high speed of the flood were credible. Modern engineering analysis found the steel was half as thick as required. The tank had fundamental design and construction flaws. In April 1925, 6 years after the disaster, a court-appointed auditor finally issued his ruling. United States Industrial Alcohol was at fault. Negligent construction, inadequate testing, ignored warnings. The company paid nearly $1 million in damages. Boston's building department enacted strict regulations requiring certified expert inspections of all industrial tanks. The legacy lives on. The Great Molasses Flood changed industrial safety regulations across America. Boston led the way with new building codes. Other cities followed. The era of building whatever, wherever, however you wanted was over. Engineers now needed certification. Structures needed proper testing. Safety mattered. A small plaque now marks the site at the entrance to Puopolo Park. It commemorates the 21 victims of sweet, sticky death. The disaster became part of local culture, not just for the destruction, but for the decades-long smell. Even today, people claim that on very hot summer days, you can catch a whiff of molasses near the old disaster site. The Boston Molasses disaster reminds us that industrial progress without oversight leads to tragedy. That day, 26 million pounds of molasses became a weapon. A tsunami of sweetness turned deadly, and Boston learned that some disasters are so bizarre, so unexpected, that nobody sees them coming until the wave hits.